and welcome to episode number 9 in the Radio Man series, where we're going to talk today a little bit about improving the way that you use Marine Band as a leisure user. In my office here in Alton Broad, I've got Marine Band radios on the go 24/7 pretty well when I'm here. And there is a huge difference in the way that professional and leisure Marine Band users use radios. Now, I've got to generalise a little bit, and for those who do it really well, I do apologise, but a huge number of leisure users use the radio extremely badly. Now, I think I've got to the bottom of what it is that is happening, and maybe I can offer some suggestions on how you can improve the way that not only you use your radio, but the people at the other end understand you properly. Now, I do appreciate that for a lot of people, you bought a boat, that's the number one aim, and then you bought a radio probably for safety. I mean, there are a few people who do the sort of marine activities that mean a radio is actually required, but the vast majority of marine users need it to talk to the mariners, the various places they're going to stop off, possibly locks, possibly the port control, things like that. And some people don't even have a radio, so any form of communication has got to be better than that. Many moons ago, I actually taught A-level communication studies in college, and I thought when I first started teaching it was a really dull, boring subject. And I was wrong. It becomes very obvious that for you to communicate successfully, you've got to make sure that the message that's in your head gets to the brain of the person on the other end. Now, that's a very obvious thing to say, but when I listen to people communicating, I often hear somebody with one intention talk to the person on the other end, and I know that person has got the wrong end of the stick. It happens almost every day around here, and really most of the mistakes that are made could be corrected fairly easily, and they're not covered in that exam that many people take. Most people who get a boat will buy a radio. They'll then get an Ofcom licence for it, which is free. Ofcom don't charge for their licences, but they do expect you to then pass a test. The test is actually run on their behalf by the Royal Yachting Association, and essentially you turn up at a test centre, they teach you a little bit about radios and how to communicate, and then a visiting examiner turns up, tests you, and you pass. I'm not actually sure that people ever fail it because the test is structured in a way that makes sure you get through. And even though I sell radios, I repair radios, I install radios, and I've got a testing and demonstration licence, even I had to take the test, and I was the only person in the room that knew nothing about boats. And they thought that was extremely odd. But I did learn quite a lot. Now, on that course, what they will teach you is the correct way to essentially make sure you stay safe. So that course deals with practical stuff like how you should call on channel 16 if you want to talk to the Coast Guard, and you'll be told all sorts of ways to make sure that your details get across to the person at the other end. And being honest, the details are quite straightforward and they do actually work in practice. There's no bother there at all. Now, you also get told how to deal with a mayday. So if there's an emergency, you know how to call and how to make sure you get effective service from the Coast Guard, the lifeboat, the Coast Watch people, any of those. So communication has to have some sort of order. This is where it gets a bit complicated. You get given a radio. Someone then expects you to be able to use it. Now, if you're taught to do it properly, then there are all sorts of things that will get in the way. A common one is simply the name of your vessel. I made a note this morning of some of the vessel names that are on my plotter here. So they're the names that the AIS system has picked up, and they're currently moored around here. Well, some of them are very straightforward. I mean, there's one here, it says Windcat 1. It's one of the vessels that goes out to the offshore wind farms. Windcat 1. There's probably going to be a Windcat 2 and a Windcat 3 and so on. And that's fairly straightforward. There's another boat that's moored up in the Broads. It seems to sit there all the time, called Ibis. It's a nice simple name, isn't it? So Ibis, if you called that up on the radio, I think whoever's at the other end would get it straight away. Other names are sort of evocative of other things. So there's a vessel called Goldeneye. Again, it's the sort of name that trips off the tongue fairly easily, and because of the James Bond connection, you probably remember it. We've also got my favourite, this actually popped up this morning, Thunderbird 2. Great name for a boat, isn't it? Thunderbird 2. But some of the others are not quite so good. I've got one called HST Hazel. Now, nothing wrong with HST Hazel, but it's an awful lot of huh sounds. And one of the things with radios is that if somebody is loud and clear, then you understand things. But if there's a lot of noise on your signal, then H sounds can often get lost. So Hazel might well end up being thought of as Hazel. And if someone's trying to find you in a list, that's not a particularly good thing. We've also got names like Bilbao. Well, Bilbao. It's not actually that easy a name for some people to pronounce. We've got Kalmar. Okay, that's not too bad. Then we've got one called Farah Kiara. Kiara? C-I-A-R-A. Now, if you're probably Irish, you're going to say it's Kira. If you're English, you're probably going to be stuck and probably say Kiara? Kira? We don't know. So that one is probably going to be the name of a vessel that gets you asked to repeat it. Now, if you repeat it and say Kira, they're still probably going to think, well, is that a K? So Kira is one of those names that you're probably going to have to spell phonetically, as in the Charlie, India, Alpha, Romeo, Alpha. And then it makes it longer, doesn't it? So if you've got to do that every time, your boat is going to be an extremely annoying thing when you have to keep spelling the name. I think being able to pass the name of your vessel is a pretty critical thing. And no doubt you get asked for repeats if you've got a slightly unusual name. Probably sounded very good when you picked it, but in practice, especially with people the other end who English is not their first language, it can be quite tricky. What do we do? Well, if you've been on the test, you'll know that you're supposed to repeat the words in a particular order, and they tell you to do it 3 times. So in this particular case, it might well be, this is Kira, 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 and you have to repeat it 3 times. Well, okay, it's a bit of a mouthful. But if you've got one of those longer names, then you're going to have to call it up. So you would probably end up going a sort of Humber Coast Guard, Humber Coast Guard, Humber Coast Guard, this is Yacht Kira, Yacht Kira, Yacht Kira. That's pretty mouthy. If you're going to do it like that, what's the point? I mean, why have you been told to do it 3 times? Look at it the other way round. The reason you're told to do it 3 times is because probably the first time, all that happens is the Coast Guard person, the other end with a headset on, goes, what? Looks up. If you then say Kira the second time, they've heard Kira, you then say it the 3rd time, and by that time, they're probably already typing. So they've started to type. If you say it once, so if it's Humber Coast Guard, this is Yacht Kira. Well, the first thing that happens is someone go, did someone call us? What happened? They didn't catch it the first time. It's not because they're no good. It's because they were probably doing something else. You suddenly perk up on the radio and they're supposed to know who you are. And of course they don't. One of the reasons for actually saying Humber Coast Guard first is it perks them up. And if you've said Humber Coast Guard 3 times, then they're ready to actually receive what you're going to send. And when you let go of the button, you say over. Now, one of the pet hates of the professional communication users, are those folk who make up their own words for things. And the cardinal sin of all radio communication, and we're not talking about just marine band, but we're talking about marine band, aviation, radio hams, anybody who uses radios for either their work or leisure. Over and out. It doesn't exist. Think about it. Over means you're expecting a response. Out means you're not. So there's no point saying over and out, because it means I'm ready to receive your message, but I've gone. It makes no sense at all. So if you hear anybody who says over and out, automatically you've made a judgment about them. You've made a judgment that they probably don't know what they're doing. And sadly, an awful lot of people who use radio don't know what they're doing. They forget totally that the person the other end needs certain information. So they need to know who you are. Now, that's why we do this repeat it 3 times thing, because on that first contact, you need to know who's who. Now, once you've actually established contact and they're calling you by your right vessel name, and you know you're talking to Humber Coast Guard and you're not talking to one of the other MRCC centres, then communication is established. You're both ready for whatever comes next. And from that moment onwards, you only need to say it once. So once communication is established, you can pack in all this 3 times nonsense because it's not needed anymore. You've got your communication path. It's working. You've proved it's okay. So that bit then moves on to just having a conversation. And one of those things they teach you on the course is if you want something, you must make sure you ask for it. Don't assume that they know what you want. If you actually need a tow, ask for it. Don't just tell them that you're drifting. Tell them what you would like done about it. Now, the Coast Guard do not chat. I mean, it's part of their communication sort of ethos, is that they are quite abrupt. Now, that's not meant to be disparaging to anybody. It's not meant to indicate anything at all, apart from the fact it's a professional service, and professional service like the fire, ambulance, police, Coast Guard, they just keep it short and to the point. Short is actually important because when things are going on, you don't want people who ramble like me. There's no point in that at all, because people just saying, yes, it's okay, right, I'll just, and they umming and ahhing. Forget it. Just think before you push the button, say what you have to say, and then let go. And that works pretty well. Now, okay, we've pretty well sorted on that. What about this phonetic language stuff? So use phonetics if you need them. There is no point saying that if your boat is called Blackbird, well, you can actually just say, this is Blackbird. It's the sort of word that, although it's a long word, it's pretty easy to understand, even if English is not your first language. So Blackbird works. There's no need to then do the Bravo, Lima, because that wastes time as well. So only use phonetics when there's a chance it's going to be misunderstood. Now, on the subject of being misunderstood, how many times have you heard people ask for a signal report? I mean, pretty much what people do is they turn the radio on and just for a bit of peace of mind, they call up maybe the local marina or maybe the port control or even the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard always answer requests for signal reports, but they really don't like doing it. And very often, signal reports are done pretty badly. So what I'm going to do now is show you how signal reports can be misunderstood. So if I take a radio here and I use one of my own channels. So this is not going to be a marine band channel. It's one that I've got a license for. It's one I can just use for the business. So if I actually call out on the radio and do a test, what I'm doing is recording it the other end. So we'll hear what it sounds like. Now, here in the studio, you're hearing probably really decent quality, hopefully. And this microphone is quite nice, and it means that you can understand my voice pretty well. And the other thing in here is it's quiet. So if I call up on this radio here East Anglian Radio, testing 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. East Anglian Radio, testing 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. East Anglian Radio, testing 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. East Anglian Radio, testing 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. Now, one of the things with that, of course, is that I was quite close to the radio, wasn't I? With this radio here, I know that the microphone is there. So on this radio, the microphone is there. So if I hold it there, the microphone is close enough to my mouth that I'm going to be loud enough, but without doing this. East Anglian Radio, testing 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. East Anglian Radio, testing 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. So that was a test far too close. And equally, if I do it from here, East Anglian Radio, testing 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. East Anglian Radio, testing 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. Now, if you did that as a radio test, what are they going to say? Loud and clear. Well, what does that actually mean, loud and clear? Loud is the volume, and clear, a good way to look at that one, is the clarity. Now, what's going to get in the way of clarity? Quite a few things, actually. Number one, wind. A light breeze passing across the little microphone on a radio like that can actually sound like a hurricane. The other thing that impacts on how well you communicate is the signal strength. Now, some radios will actually give you a little meter that tells you how strong a signal is. And what actually happens with these things is that you are easy to understand, you get further away, you stay easy to understand, and then you start to go into that murky territory where as the distance increases, the signal strength drops quickly. And as the signal strength drops, the volume actually stays the same, but the level of hiss in the background creeps up. And at some point, the hiss in the background will be too much and you won't be able to hear anything at all. I'll give you a little demo about that. So at the moment, I think we could certainly say it's loud and clear. So what I'm going to do is adjust the signal strength so it's not. Right, so I've pressed some buttons and now my receiver will think I'm a lot further away. 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. 1 2 3 4 5 5 4 3 2 1. So once we reduce the signal in strength, what would you say? Well, you could say you're noisy. What sort of signal reports would be useful? Well, practical ones. Like very often I hear somebody and it sounds like they're talking like that. They're really muffled. And they ask for a signal report and what comes back is loud and clear. Well, it wasn't. It was muffled. So if somebody asks you for a signal report and you want to give an honest one, you can tell them that they're loud but quite muffled. You can tell them they're noisy but clear. You can tell them that the signal strength is high but the clarity is poor. You could say all sorts of things that would be genuinely helpful. Sometimes you could be brutally honest and just say it in ordinary speech. Well, you sound extremely muffled and an awful long way away. Now, muffled is that sort of tone that sort of makes it difficult to quite understand diction. So the muffled bit is helpful because it might well be that you've actually got someone on the other end who doesn't know where the microphone in their radio is. Now that sounds stupid, but in actual fact it happens. On this particular radio, the microphone is hidden right down the bottom of the grill. Well, when you're talking into it, where should you hold it? And you need to find that out when you buy a new radio. Find out if it works. If you're using a microphone that's got a fist mic, well, press the button and talk like that. Or talk like that. Or talk like that. Well, one of those is going to work with your voice. I actually went to see a chap in the harbour here at Lowestoft who was having trouble with the port control people hearing him. And I went down to his boat, had a look. The radio seemed to be performing fine when we were tied up. So we called up the port control and they said, yeah, you're loud and clear. And he was fine. He was just doing the normal things. He then decided we better go out to sea a bit, which is a bit of a shock for me because I don't really do boats. But off we went. And then I asked him to call up the port control again. He was steering the little boat. It was a small catamaran. And the radio was over here. So the closest he could get to his mouth was about that far away. Now we're in an open bridge on this thing and it's windy. There's a diesel engine going like a what? And he's going, Lowestoft port control, Lowestoft port control. And I said, you've got to speak in the microphone. He said, well, I can't steer and speak in the microphone. Crazy. So realistically, you need to work out where these microphones work best. And with a microphone like this, the actual little bit that lets the sound in is right in the middle. So sort of close in like that is probably about right for most people's voices. If you've got a very noisy environment, then you are going to go a bit closer. If you go more further away, that might still work, but it's very then dependent on the wind and things like that. So that's a bit more tricky. But that's the sort of starting point for sort of successful communications. And don't forget, we're talking about communications quality. We're not talking about hi-fi. One of the things that all two-way radios do is they chop off the bass and they chop off the very treble at the top and just leave the bit in the middle. It's sort of telephone quality, really. And it does take a bit of tuning your ears to be able to be effective. So lots of things you can do to make life easier for the others. Think before you press the button is probably the best advice, I think. But speak clearly, speak at a speed that would allow people the other end to really understand what you're saying. If you've got complicated words to send, then be very careful on how you pronounce them, because there's no guarantee the people the other end will actually understand them properly. If you're going to tell them where you are, you just use precise speech. Now, the professional mariners will look at a display and they'll know their lat and their lon, and they'll be able to actually tell you exactly where they are. Well, you probably can't do that, but if you just use common, ordinary language, you'll be able to pass that information off. And if you're abeam the lighthouse, all the locals will know instantly exactly where you are. Don't confuse the issue by trying to be ultra precise, trying to work out that you're 1.2 nautical miles away from something. Well, 1.2, just say a mile. It's fine. Everybody would understand that. There's no need for precision like that when you've got no way of actually measuring it yourself. So if you think you're a mile and a half and you're really only a mile, it's not particularly helpful, is it? So you can be as brief as you want if it gets your point across. So to sum up, whatever you do, if you want to be taken seriously, no over and out ever. Because all it does is makes the people who listen smirk. They'll instantly categorise you as, oh dear. And you don't really want that, do you? So you want to be brief, to the point, professional, clear, concise, and human. You're not some sort of robot. If you're going to talk to any of the professionals along your way, then, they know that you're a leisure boater. They know that you're probably not in a huge, great big ship. They know you've got a little boat and you're just floating it down the river. They're quite happy with that. But they don't like it when those people then do stupid things, and they do all the time. So try not to fall into those traps. Clear, concise, and be as professional as you can, but don't go over the top with the repeating everything 3 times over and over and over. Just be careful. There we go, some tips and tricks on how you can communicate more effectively on the marine band. If it keeps you safe, it's worth doing. Anyway, look after yourselves. I'll see you on the next video. Take care.